In this demo, I'll show you how to create your first fake database with Fabricate. Fabricate is Tonic's tool for generating synthetic data from scratch, normally to fit a target schema. And so while a lot of what you'll see will look a lot like a relational database, you can also use Fabricate to generate data for like JSON files, for document databases, really for any purpose whatsoever. Maybe even generating data for like API posts. Things are always expressed as rows and columns, sometimes with embedded JSON, but you can really use the data for any purpose. The most common way to get started is with some sort of a schema in mind. And so I'm going to start with a SQL file that is the DDL for creating a database. Just all of the tables and relationships, some custom data types, but no data. So this would just create an empty database. So I can take this and then paste it into the schema definition box here. Give my database a name. Select the target platform like Postgres. And then when I hit create database, Fabricate is going to parse this schema definition and automatically set up my fake database to match that schema. Now, as I mentioned, this doesn't have to be just SQL. This could be something like a Swagger file. It could be something like just a JSON schema. It could be even just a plain text sort of description of the type of database that you want to generate. Maybe you actually don't have a data model yet and you're using Fabricate to play around with potential data models. And you can just describe what you want and AI will try to come up with something that best fits your description. So let's get started. So Fabricate's now parsing that SQL file and it's coming up with all the tables and columns and settings needed to generate realistic data for that data model. So here we see the first table called customers. And you can see it's got things like the customer ID, the first name, last name, email address, and some location data, and some timestamp data for when the rows were created or last updated. And so without actually changing any settings, we're already getting realistic looking names and locations and dates. To see the settings behind any of those things, we can click on the gear icon. So like, for example, customer ID is a primary key that's just using the number generator with a distribution of auto increment, meaning it just like starts at a particular value and then each row subsequently increases by 1. The generator here is really the most important thing. Fabricate has a huge library of generators for many different domains, from like finance to location to healthcare, personal data, travel data, stock data, banking data, all sorts of things are represented there. And then there are also these very flexible generic generators like numbers for things like prices and ages and primary keys. And so if it was something like a price or an age, I might use a normal distribution or a uniform distribution. But for something that's just counting rows, then we can use auto increment. Okay, so let's go and look at, let's say, first name and last name and email. You'll notice email address is automatically derived from first name and last name, so it makes them very realistic. For location data, a similar thing happens, that if you bring in multiple location columns into a single table, they will all line up. So like Silver Spring is in Maryland, that's a postal code in Silver Spring. That's an area code in the area. And then for date times, we have a very powerful date time generator that has a few different types. Absolute is just picks a random date between a start and an end. Relative is it generates a date relative to another date column. And then series, which is what we're using here, creates a date time series that either starts at a fixed point in time or starts at a date specified by another column. Optionally, you can partition the series by something like a foreign key. So if you wanted to have a different series for each foreign key value, you could do that with partition by. And then you set the interval between the time points. So in this case, we're using a uniform interval of between 1 and 10 minutes between each generated value. So it's really just simulating that we're getting a new customer between every 1 and 10 minutes. And you can see here updated at is using the relative type of date time that's between 0 and 10 days after created at. So that ensures that our updated at will always be after our created at. By default, all the tables that get imported start with just 100 rows. Obviously, you can increase or decrease that, but you can also derive the row count from a relationship to another table. So for example, if I go over to orders here, each order comes from a customer. Because we have this foreign key in our script under orders, foreign key to the customer ID column of the customer's table, Fabricate chose foreign key. It picked the right table, the right column. And if we wanted to base the number of rows in this table on this relationship, we can click this checkbox here. Then we just specify the cardinality as a numeric distribution, so we might use uniform or normal, or a fixed distribution if we wanted to have exactly the same number of rows for each customer ID value. In this case, let's say we want at least one order for every customer, but at most 3. So if I hit apply changes, then you'll see the row count is no longer 100. It's now between 1 and 3 for each customer ID, and it's randomly generating between 1 and 3 rows for each value of customer ID. For something like status, we happen to have had a enum here for order status. And so Fabricate will pick that up and it'll use only the values in that enum. It uses what's called the list generator, which just picks a random value from a specified list of values. And so that list was actually derived from the enum. If you had a check constraint on a column, it would use that as well. If you want to control the distribution of values, like let's say you wanted to have completed be 10 times as common as shipped, pending, and returned. You just put bar 10 there, and then that'll make completed the most common term. So now we have, see most things are completed. If we go over to products, you can see one of the type of generators that Fabricate has is a product name and description generator. It also will generate realistic prices. That product catalog is something similar to what you might see to a big online retailer. So it's products of all different types, nothing specific. And so like maybe that's great for your use case, or maybe your use case requires very specific products. Maybe you even want to reference products that you have in your production database. If you wanted to do that, you would take the data that you want to reference, put it in a CSV file, and attach it to the table by clicking here, uploading your file, and then you can either append it to the generated data or replace the existing data with the uploaded CSV. And so in that way, if you ever need to reference production data, or like if your code depends on very specific seed data being in your database, that's how you would do it. You can also take any reference data and import it as a new table just by clicking here, import data. So that's great for sometimes you just need to reference specific primary keys somewhere. So you upload that as a table, and then you can reference that. And if you want any table to not appear in the output, like maybe you've uploaded a CSV just so you can reference it in certain columns, you can mark any table as hidden by going to the settings on the table and then clicking hide this table when exporting. So if you do that, then the table will turn light gray, and then when you actually export your database, that table just won't appear there. So if that table is not actually in your data model, that's a good way to sort of keep your scripts from breaking. So I'll just uncheck that here because I do actually want this in my output. If you want to do any sort of denormalization of data, you can do that using what's called the SQL generator. So for example, in order items, I have quantity and unit price. If I wanted to generate a subtotal, I could do that by adding a column here, calling it subtotal, picking the SQL generator, and then I could either type in an expression like quantity times unit price, rounded to 2 decimals. Off the top of my head, I might get the SQL wrong for that, so there's a built-in AI assist where you can just tell it in plain English what you want. So literally you can say calculate the subtotal and round to 2 decimals. And it'll write that SQL for you, and then you'll have your calculated value. So this is great anytime you need to derive the value of a column from other columns. Like maybe, for example, you have an order status column, and if the order status is returned, then you want to fill out the like returned reason column. Otherwise, you'd want a null in that column. So it's great for that sort of if-else logic. It's great for numeric calculations, for concatenating things. All that sort of programmatic data generation, the SQL generator is really good for. You can also adjust the value of any column using post-processing SQL. So if I wanted all of my product names to just be like uppercase, I could go into advanced here and then just do like upper product name, or I could use the AI assist as well, hit apply changes, and it'll use the same generated values, but now it's making them all uppercase. If you want certain values to be the same every time you generate data with Fabricate, you can do that by applying a seed to a column. So the seed basically is the seed behind the randomization of that column. And so if the seed is fixed, then it will never generate new data. It'll always be the same. So the value of the seed doesn't really matter that much. So we give you this handy little button to just generate a seed as a UUID. And then when I hit apply changes, now it's going to freeze this column so that every time I generate a new version of this database by clicking export data or using the API, I'll get exactly the same values for product name. So that's useful if you need to reference consistent data in like unit tests. So in that way you can mix and match data that would be randomized every time you generated a new copy of this database versus some of the data being the same every time. So you can have both random and predictable data in your database. Okay, so everything we've seen so far is a preview of what would be generated if we exported the full copy of this database. In order to do that, you can click Export Data here, and you can either download the data as one of these formats, like SQL inserts, a zip of CSV files, a zip of JSON lines files, or you can push data to an existing database by filling out the connection information here. You can also generate the full version of the database using the API. So if you go to Docs here, and then you can scroll down to the API section using the Fabricate API. Then if you wanted to generate data from an existing database, you make a post to this endpoint. You provide the name of the workspace, the database, and a few other parameters here. And then it will either generate and download the data for you, or you could push data into a target database just like you could with the UI as well. So a really popular workflow is to upload a schema into Fabricate, tweak the settings as necessary. Once everything looks good, then write a script or use Fabricate's node package to connect to the API and generate data, download it, or push it into a target database, and make that API script part of your CI/CD workflow, so you can repeat that programmatically. So that's the general idea of how to start creating fake databases with Fabricate. If you're trying things out and you need some help, you can click this handy Discord icon here and get some real-time help from one of our developers in the Discord channel. Or you can click Give Us Feedback and just ask a question, and we'll answer over email. So thank you all. Enjoy.